Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is one of the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and it's a book I'm very excited to jump into. But first, I'd like to light a candle for us, just for a moment. I know some of us can get a little anxious when someone lights a candle in one of these videos and doesn't explicitly show themselves putting it out while we're trying to fall asleep. So it will just be lit while we're saying our daily affirmations for the day. If you guys happen to hear the noise of the street outside, just bear with me. It's one of the things I like most about living here, and I hope it's one of the things you like about listening. But let's go ahead and get into our daily affirmations. I am protected. I am protected. I am protected. I am safe. I am safe. I am safe. I am a human having a human experience. I am a human having a human experience. I am a human having a human experience. I am no better or worse than anyone else. I am no better or worse than anyone else. I am no better or worse than anyone else. My vulnerability is beautiful and powerful. My vulnerability is beautiful and powerful. I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. Okay, and now we are going to blow out the candle. And now we're going to get to reading, which I'm so excited for. Okay. I love this when a book has end papers. That's the term for this paper that goes in on the inside of a book cover that matches the cover of the color. The Hound of the Baskervilles. So, this book has a rather lengthy acknowledgments section and introduction section that I'm not going to be reading, just because it's a lot of historical context and it's not the main story. I am, though, occasionally going to be flipping back and forth between the main story and the footnotes section at the back of the book, where it gives us a little bit of historical context and details for some of the things on the screen. That way we get lots of page flipping and extra sounds, and you get to hear me being a curious little history nerd. Okay, first here we have the dedication. This story owes its inception to my friend, Mr. Fletcher Robinson, who has helped me both in the general plot and in the local details. A.C.D., which is of course our author's name, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who was usually very late in the mornings, save upon those not infrequent occasions when he stayed up all night, was seated at the breakfast table. I stood upon the hearth rug and picked up the stick with which our visitor had left behind the night before. It was a fine, thick piece of wood, bulbous-headed, of the sort which is known as a Penang lawyer. Okay, and on to the footnotes we go for the first time. I'm not going to read every footnote. This book is rather fond of them, but I am going to stop for the ones I don't know or don't know well. Okay, so that was number 4, excuse me, a Penang lawyer. A Penang lawyer, a walking stick made, according to William S. Baring Gould, from the stem of a small palm, Lucidia acutifida, that grows in Penang, an island in the Straits of Malacca, in Silver Blaze, another of Holmes's Dartmoor adventures. From the memoirs, another Penang lawyer, a heavy, bulbous-headed cane weighted with lead, is thought to be the murder weapon. Spoilers for that book in the series. As a Penang lawyer, just under the head was a broad silver band nearly an inch across, to James Mortimer, M.R.C.S., from his friends of the C.C.H., was engraved upon it, with the date 1884. It was just a stick, as the old-fashioned family practitioner would carry, dignified, solid, and reassuring. Well, Watson, what do you make of it? Holmes was sitting with his back to me, and I had given him no sign of my occupation. How did you know what I was doing? I believe you have eyes in the back of your head. I have, at least, a well-polished, silver-plated coffee pot in front of me, he said. But tell me, Watson, what do you make of our visitor's stick? Since we have been so unfortunate as to miss him and have no notion of his errand, this accidental souvenir becomes of importance. Let me hear you reconstruct the man by an examination of it. I think, I said, following so far as I could the methods of my companion, that Dr. Mortimer is a successful, elderly medical man, well esteemed, since those who know him give him this mark of their appreciation. Good, said Holmes. Excellent. I'm going to remove the candle now, since it seems to be in our way. I think also that the probability is in favor of his being a country practitioner who does a great deal of his visiting on foot. Why so? Because the stick, although originally a very handsome one, has been so knocked about that I can hardly imagine a town practitioner carrying it. The thick iron ferrule. Okay. Off to the footnotes we go again. Number 7. The thick iron ferrule. The metal ring encasing the base of a walking stick. Oh, I didn't know that there was a word for that. To prevent the wood splitting when in use. Well, you learn something new every day. Why so? A great deal of his walking on foot, his visiting on foot. Why so? Okay. The thick iron ferrule is so worn down, so it is evident that he has done a great amount of walking with it. Perfectly good, said Holmes. Then again, there is the Friends of the C.C.H. I should guess that to be the something hunt, a local hunt whose members have possibly given some surgical assistance, and which has made him a small presentation in return. Really, Watson, you excel yourself, said Holmes, pushing back his chair and lighting a cigarette. I am bound to say that in all accounts which you have been so good as to give me of my own small achievements, you have habitually underrated your own abilities. It may be that you are not yourself luminous, but you are a conductor of light. That is a very backhanded compliment. Some people, without possessing a genius, have a remarkable power of stimulating. I confess, my dear fellow, that I am very much in your debt. He had never said as much before, and I must admit that his words gave me keen pleasure, for I had been piqued by his indifference to my admiration, and afraid, my dear Watson, that most of your conclusions were erroneous. When I said you had stimulated me, I meant to be frank, that in noting your fallacies, I was occasionally guided towards the truth. Not that you were entirely wrong in this instance. The man is certainly a country practitioner, and he walks a good deal. Then I was right, to that extent. But that was all. No, my dear Watson, not at all. Not all. By no means all. I would suggest, for example, that when a presentation to a doctor is more likely to come from a hospital than a hunt, and when the initials CC are placed in front of before the hospital, the words Charing Cross very naturally suggest themselves. You may be right. The probability lies in that direction. And if we take this as a working hypothesis, we have a fresh basis from which to start our construction of this unknown visitor. Well then, supposing that CCH does stand for Charing Cross Hospital, what further inferences may we draw? Do none suggest themselves? You know my methods. Apply them. I can only think of the obvious conclusion that the man has practiced in town before going to the country. I think we might venture a little farther than this. Look at it in this light. On what occasion would it be most probable that such a presentation would be made? When would his friends unite to give him a pledge of their goodwill? Obviously, at the moment when Dr. Mortimer withdrew from the service of the hospital in order to start in practice for himself. We know that there has been a presentation. We believe there has been a change from a town hospital to a country practice. Is it then stretching our inference too far to say that the presentation was on the occasion of the change? It certainly seems probable. Now, you will observe that he could not have been on the staff of the hospital. Since only a man well established in a London practice could hold such a position, and such a one would not drift into the country. What was he then? If he was in the hospital and yet not on the staff, he could only have been a house surgeon or a house physician, little more than a senior student. And he left 5 years ago. The date is on the stick. So you're a grave, middle-aged family practitioner vanishes into thin air, my dear Watson, and there emerges a young fellow under 35, amiable, unambitious, absent-minded, and the possessor of a favorite dog, which I would describe as roughly being larger than a terrier and smaller than a mastiff. I laughed incredulously as Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his settee and blew little wavering rings of smoke up to the ceiling. As to the latter part, I have no means of checking you, I said, but at least it's not too difficult to find out a few particulars about the man's age and professional career. From my small medical shelf, I took down the medical directory and turned up the name. There were several Mortimers, but only one could be our visitor. I read his record aloud. Mortimer James, M.R.C.S., 1882, Grimpen, Dartmoor, Devon, house surgeon from 1882 to 1884 at Charing Cross Hospital, winner of the Jackson Prize for Comparative Pathology, with essay entitled Is Disease a Reversion? Corresponding member of the Swedish Pathological Society, author of Some Freaks of Atavism, Lancet, 1882, Do We Progress? Journal of Pathology, March, 1883, medical officer for the parishes of Grimpen, Thorsley, and Highbarrow. Okay, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I'm interested to see what the footnote 14 has in store for us, so let's go looking for it. Here we go. Reversion, corresponding member, atavism. Dr. Mortimer's essay was evidently about whether disease is usual examples of resemblances to ancestors. These linked themes play an important part in the plot of The Hound. A corresponding member of the society is one who lives some way away and thus corresponds by letter. Oh, I wonder if that means he's Swedish then. If he was a member of the Swedish Pathological Society. Let's find out. Medical officer for the parishes of Grimpen, Thorsley, and Highbarrow. No mention of the local hunt, Watson, said Holmes with a mischievous smile, but a country doctor, as you very astutely observed. I think that I am fairly justified in my inferences. As to the adjectives, I said, if I remember right, amiable, unambitious, and absent-minded. It is my experience that it is only an amiable man in this world who receives testimonials, only an unambitious one who abandons a London career for the country, and only an absent-minded one who leaves his stick and not his visiting card after waiting an hour in your room. And the dog has been in the habit of carrying this stick behind his master. Being a heavy stick, the dog has held it tightly in the middle, and the marks of his teeth are very, very plainly visible. The dog's jaw, as shown in the marks of his teeth, are very plainly visible. The dog's jaw, as shown in the spaces between these marks, is too broad, in my opinion, for a terrier, and not broad enough for a mastiff. It may have been. By Jove, it is a curly-haired spaniel. He had risen and paced the room as he spoke. Now he halted in the recess of the window. There was such a ring of conviction to his voice that I glanced up in surprise. My dear fellow, how can you possibly be so sure of that? For the very simple reason that I see the dog himself on our very doorstep, and there is the ring of its owner. I assume that means that Dr. Mortimer just rang the doorbell. Don't move, I beg you, Watson. He is a professional brother of yours, and your presence may be of assistance to me. Now is the dramatic moment of fate, Watson. When you hear a step on the stair, which is walking into your life, and you know not whether for good or for ill. What does Dr. James Mortimer, the man of science, ask of Sherlock Holmes, the specialist in crime? Come in. I assume somewhere in that paragraph that Holmes opened the door. The way that Conan Doyle writes these paragraphs, it's very confusing and very much not the modern way of doing things. The appearance of our visitor was a surprise to me, since I had expected a typical country practitioner. He was a very tall, thin man, with a long nose like a beak, which shot out between two keen gray eyes, set closely together and sparkling brightly from behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He was clad in professional but rather slovenly fashion, for his frock coat was dingy and his trousers frayed. Though young, his long back was already bowed, and he walked with a forward thrust of his head and a general air of peering benevolence. As he entered, his eyes fell upon the stick in Holmes's hand, and he ran towards it with an exclamation of joy. I am so very glad, said he. I was not sure whether I had left it here or in the shipping office, and I would not lose that stick for the world. A presentation, I see, said Holmes. Yes, sir. From Charing Cross Hospital. From one or two friends there on the occasion of my marriage. Dear, dear, that's bad, said Holmes. Dear, dear, that's bad, said Holmes, shaking his head. Dr. Mortimer blinked through his glasses in mild astonishment. Why was it bad? Only that you have disarranged our little deductions. Your marriage, you say? Yes, sir, I married, and so left the hospital, and with it all hopes of a consulting practice. It was necessary to make a house of my own. Come, we are not so wrong after all, said Holmes. And now, Dr. James Mortimer, Mr. Humble MRCS, and a man of precise mind, evidently. A dabbler in science, Mr. Holmes, a picker-up of shells on the shores of the great unknown ocean. Footnote number 15. I'm interested to see what that's about. a picker-up of shells on the shores of the great unknown ocean. A reference to Sir Isaac Newton's famous admission, repeated in Dr. Brewster's Memoirs of Newton, Volume 2, Chapter 27, and of course we have the whole lengthy quote there. Also compare William Blake's "To See the World in a Grain of Sand" from Auguries of Innocence. On the shores of the great unknown ocean, I presume that it is Mr. Sherlock Holmes whom I am addressing, and not... No, this is my friend Dr. Watson. Glad to meet you, sir. I have heard your name mentioned in connection with that of your friend. You interest me very much, Mr. Holmes. I had hardly expected so dolichiocephalic, that's a very strange word, a skull or such well-marked supraorbital development. Would you have any objection to my running until the original is available? Would be an ornament to any anthropological museum. It is not my intention to be fulsome, but I confess that I covet your skull. Okay, there was quite a bit of interesting information in there. Is there a footnote in this? Let's see. Ah, yes, number 16. So, dolichiocephalic, I'm never going to pronounce that word right. A skull, or such a well-marked supraorbital development, partial parietal fissure. Okay, so it's talking about each in turn, each of the items. So complex word, is so long-headed or elongated a skull. And then supraorbital development means a skull which has a lot of sort of space above the orbit of the eye, sort of that little socket where your eye is. And then the parietal fissure is the fissure between the right and left parietal bones along the top of the skull. So if when you were younger you ever sort of ran a finger down the back of your head, you would have felt a groove. And that is actually that fissure. So over time, slowly those two bones on that make up sort of the back and top half of your skull knit together as you get older. Our scientific friend, Dr. or Mr. Mortimer, is rather overplaying his hand here. Dr. Watson will later write of him, never was there such a single-minded enthusiast as he. Okay. And now back to our story. I confess that I covet your skull. Sherlock Holmes waved our strange visitor into a chair. You are an enthusiast in your line of thought, I perceive, sir, as I am in mine, said he. I observe from your forefingers that you make your own cigarettes. And another footnote, so away we go. 17. I observe from your forefinger that you make your own cigarettes. Holmes may have been an authority on the ashes produced by cigarette, and pipe tobacco. He had early on in his career written a monograph upon the distinction between the ashes of various tobacco, but even he couldn't possibly reduce from a forefinger whether the client rolled his own cigarettes or purchased them from a tobacconist. He could, of course, tell from nicotine stains whether the client was a smoker, but that was a very different conclusion and a much more mundane one. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is making Holmes seem cleverer here than really you could be realistically. Okay. Your own cigarettes. Have no hesitation was silent, but his little darting glances showed me the interest which he took in our curious companion. "I presume, sir," said he at last, that it was not merely for the purpose of examining my skull that you have done me the honor." The work of Monsieur Bertillon, Alphonse Bertillon, and apologies for my accent, 1853 to 1914, the French anthropologist who had recently invented the science of anthropometry, which involved measuring and recording physical characteristics, including scars, and then classifying them according to the length of an individual's head. This data was thought to be especially valuable for identifying criminals and what were known as criminal types. Holmes was an early advocate through his practice of the importance of the Bertillon system, fingerprinting, and ballistics. In short, the science of detection. But Bertillon system, when used crudely, was also used to distinguish racial types and to generalize about criminal tendencies from facial characteristics. Oh, so it is like phrenology. Okay. The work of Monsieur Bertillon must always appeal strongly. Then had you not better consult him? I said, sir, that to the precisely scientific mind, but as a practical man of affairs, it is to acknowledge that you stand alone. I trust, sir, that I have not inadvertently just a little, said Holmes. I think, Dr. Mortimer, you would do wisely if without more ado you would kindly tell me plainly what the exact nature of the problem is with which you demand my assistance. And that, guys, is the end of Chapter 1. Next time, we'll move on to Chapter 2, The Curse of the Baskervilles. I hope you all enjoyed reading with me tonight. And that this video helped relax you or helped you fall asleep. If you liked it, feel free to subscribe or drop a like down below to let me know that you appreciate the content. Until then, I'm Kat, and I'll see you guys later.